All right, good morning. My name is James Moran. Welcome to this, excuse me, welcome to this special series coming at the back of the signing ceremony between Nation Media Group and the Baraza Media Lab. We're going to have a festival later, but this partnership allows us, everyone in this space of media, journalism, to find means and ways on how we can talk about the future of the business, talk about sustainability, talk about the craft itself. And I have with me on the panel interesting people for the next few minutes to discuss all these questions that the business and the media landscape is grappling with. I do have on my right Molly Jensen, CEO of AfriPods. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
I do have Maurice Otieno, who's the CEO of Baraza Media Lab.
Asante.
And I do have Oliver Madenge, who's the group multimedia editor here at the Nation Media Group. Ladies, gentlemen, such an important time for the media landscape. We do know of all these sort of interruptions that are going on with not only the business, but that's going on with the craft itself. Molly, could you talk us briefly around the landscape of the media in the continent and in Kenya, and what do you think, is sort of happening? What are the key things that I think are happening currently?
Sure. I think that's a really wonderful framing question to give context on the media landscape here in the ecosystem. So we know that Africa is the fastest growing digital market in the world. We know that this continent has had not the same opportunities as some of the others in terms of getting their stories told. And we're a continent of rich orated history. So you see these incredible journalists like yourself. We have social media that's super powerful. We have podcasts that are up and coming. We have video content, TikTok, different social platforms, including Facebook and Instagram, that have taken up space here. But what I see and what I believe will continue to happen is massive growth, exponential growth, really, as the younger generation becomes more involved in society, being that they've kind of grown up with the internet.
Maurice, how do you see, coming from the space and dealing with the people that you deal with, not just journalists, but content creators and everyone else, influencers? How do you see the sort of Kenyan industry shaping up in terms of what's important, for this sort of community?
Thanks, James, for the question. I see a situation where, initially it was very clear. This is journalism, this is social media influencers, but now I'm seeing more and more sort of like marrying of each other, where they both have a space to coexist and actually work together. I think the key thing will be the content and the, for lack of a better word, the ethics around the content and how it's shared. But I do see a situation where there's no longer a divide between social media influencers or podcasters. For us, I see them all as a media ecosystem. Also, to add a little bit on to what Molly has said, with Africa being having a mean age of 19, that's really lower than even countries like India you had mentioned earlier. For me, I think the thing I foresee with our wicked challenges that we're facing, from lack of proper infrastructures, but also being that we're existing in this world where information is, it's democratized. Right. So that means we could learn from people who have done it and look at our context and possibly even leapfrog some of the solutions that, some of the challenges that we have based on the learning that we get and our context.
And Oliver, the legacy media has to change. We all know that. We all say those things, but then the change is not clear. What kind of change are we talking about here? Is the change the craft itself, the software of what journalism is, or the change is the platform in that sense? What do you think is happening, and what is the change that the craft itself has to go through?
I think what I always say is that journalism is not changing. It's only the platforms that we are putting the information on, how the audiences are behaving, because the audience is forcing us to change how we are doing. The audience wakes up in the morning and starts looking for content. So as journalists, what are we doing to ensure that we give them that content at the time that they want and in the spaces that they are in? And so the journalism is not changing. We have to still do and meet all the tenets of journalism that exist. But at the end of the day, the audience is what is pushing us to where we have to go. Legacy media has to change at the end of it all. It's not dying anytime soon. TV is still there. Newspapers will still be there. But the manner in which journalists have to work and the speed at which they have to work and the spaces that they have to work have to change. Because today, we have more people listening to podcasts than radio, for instance. We have more people who are watching TV through streaming instead of the box at home. People no longer wait until 9 p.m. to watch the news. Someone will come at 9:30 and start the news by rewinding on YouTube and all that. And so it's not the craft that is changing, but it's more of how we are doing it and where we are doing it at.
How do we just bring it up so that anyone can pick it up? How do we then create this environment in our media space and in Kenya today, where these collaborations we're talking about are happening? We're not only discussing these things, but we are doing things a bit better together, recognizing the changes, but also the opportunity. How do we start? Where do we start with that kind of sort of opportunity?
I just wanted to plug the Africa Media Festival. That's where we start, right? So we start with the public conversation, the 5 levels of grief, where you accept. So we are at that point where we've already accepted that this is happening. So how do we bounce back to be able to course correct? I think the grievous mistake that happens in different communities is when you go into your cocoons and think that you can solve an ecosystem challenge by yourself. It doesn't matter which media house you're working for, which genre of media you are at, the entire space is changing. And for it to change, for it to be less painful, we have no option but to come together and start not only discussing, but starting to put together ideas of how would we make it a better ecosystem. So how do you work with your legacy media? How do you work with your social media platforms? But each have a space and their unique skill set that enables you to meet the consumer's needs. Because again, the marriage between business model and the content is still alive. Somebody has to pay for it. It just means that it cannot be figured out by one house. It has to be figured out by a collective action. Yeah.
Let's talk about this, someone paying for things.
Can I quickly just add to Maurice's statement? Because I think there's something really to be said here for the marriage of a partnership between a legacy media company like Nation Media Group, the largest independent media company in the region, as well as a multidisciplinary media house as Baraza. And it's such an important step in the right direction, because when you ask what do you need, you ultimately need to experiment. You need to fail. And like with leaders like Monica at NMG, you guys are empowered to put yourself as organizations in positions that you haven't been before. So something about podcasting is that with any new behavior, it takes time to grow. It takes time to understand. It takes time to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. And I think that being able to be here and on the cusp of the first inaugural Africa Media Festival, it is such a privilege to be in the room with so many incredible storytellers and so many incredible giants, so many people who have influence and impact. So I think that in order for us to move forward, it requires vulnerability, it requires comfort with failure, and it ultimately requires a lot of testing. Yeah. And hopefully we'll see more media companies following the steps that Nation has stepped forward in. More media companies partnering with Baraza, with Semabox, with Africa Podfest, with AfriPods to create content that meets their audiences where they are. Because like Maurice said, and as we were talking about earlier, our average age is 19 here. People want content the way they want it, and the way that it's being delivered now is not how they want it. So we're going to have to get comfortable with new formats.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that partnership is actually very important. Partnerships, collaborations, and I think this is one of the first steps towards doing this, because I think working together is where we get it right. As a Nation Media Group, for instance, we are looking at how do we create content for young people. We can't do that without knowing what young people want. And we can't do that without, unless we collaborate with people who are in that space.
The important things, it's not a TikTok video that will go viral. So someone needs to pay for those things. So how do we start paying for those things? And who's paying? Who's picking up the tabs?
My own perspective is that the public has no option, but at some point they have to pay. Because the person who pays is the one who calls the tunes. And there are various models that have been tested and seen out there, right? From governments supporting it to advertising, which is the model that is being used widely. And those are the people who call the tune, right? So if you don't want that and you want public interest media to thrive and you want your representation to be showcased within the media houses, then you have to pay for it. I think the only thing that will change is also what Oliver was talking about, the model of how that is paid for. Of course, there has to be the journalistic standards have to be followed while portraying some of the issues that are going on within the society currently. I remember I was watching a stand-up yesterday, which was saying that it's as if the generations have changed with what they care about. The younger generation care about very heavy things, climate change. They care about governance and accountability, and the prevalence of opioids. While the older generation, they are laissez-faire, So if you have, let's say, a practitioner who was within that space, it's more of just saying, I keep my tenets, but just change the content a little bit in a way that these people can pay for it. But it's inevitable that the public, at some point, will have to pay for content if they really value it. If
they really value. Molly, people always ask podcasters, where's the money in podcasts? I've been podcasting.
I love this question.
Yes, I've been podcasting for years. Show me the money.
So let's zoom out right now. Podcasting is very much in its infancy on the continent. We're still validating the medium. However, we are seeing it being the fastest growing medium on the fastest digital growing continent. So podcasting is a viable solution for people to make money. Now, the thing is, when you look at platforms as a whole, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it may be, most content creators aren't making most of their money from the platform. They're making it off of advertisements. And something that I feel fundamentally is important is that African creators need to be able to take up as much space as possible while getting paid for their content. If you're not capturing your value, that's exploitation. And I think that there's so many stories that haven't been told here before. So when we talk about paying content creators, yes, there are metrics, there's structure, there's CPMs that are standards across a global industry because this is a digital format. We absolutely have to be mindful of the markets that we're in, but at the same time, consistency. You don't just wake up one day and make money. You have to be a trusted voice in the ecosystem. You have to put in your 10,000 hours, but absolutely there are viable options to make money, and there are some incredible podcasters here in Kenya who do make money, whether it's through live shows, whether it's through advertisements, whether it's through sponsorships, but it's ultimately about what's important to you and how do you leverage the opportunity that comes your way.
Oliver, the same thing about funding, who pays for those things. So part of the thing about, and we go through this a lot, is audiences say, well, the content, I can't pay for that content. It's not good enough, so it needs to be a blockbuster. Can you produce a blockbuster every day that audience wants to pay? Or the question of saying that, the public is paying for it, it means comes from the public purse. In essence, then government, we find means and ways on how government can, put some money in media and for those things that, in essence, are not flashy, but they're important.
I think we have to agree that we need different forms of models for different kind of content. And at the end of the day, as Maurice said, the audience will have to pay. At some point, they'll have to accept that we are paying. But also the audience is also telling us that they want to pay for quality. They want to pay for content that has social currency. They want to pay for content that is valuable to them. So as content creators, are we getting to that level where we are giving that particular audience who you want to pay that kind of content? At the same time, we have to look at other ways. For instance, as I said, collaborations, partnerships. How do we, for instance, as Oliver or as Nation Media Group, go to Safaricom and create content with Safaricom, for instance, and instead of them seeing it as an advert, but it's something that we can work together with. And so we have to start looking at different models so that the funding can, because the money is there. People are making money out of digital, in the digital space, so it's not that the money is not there. So how do we get the money? And for me, for content creators, collaborations, partnerships, and also giving quality content that, as I mentioned, social currency and has value to me. Because even for me, today, the kind of digital subscriptions I have are because they are of value to me. I don't just pay for Netflix. I pay for Netflix because I want to, there's something specific I'm going for. I pay for Showmax for only 3 shows because that's what I want to get. I pay for New York Times for specific content. And so we have to think about it that way, because when we start thinking about content as products, not just even news itself, when you look at news as a product, you're able to sell it better than just saying that this is something that we do on a regular. And so for me, that's where we have to start from. We have to, and that's why it's very important that we have this summit coming up, so that we can actually discuss these issues and as content creators and say, where have you been going wrong? And where can we move?
Yeah. That's the summit, which is this important place, you know, to plug in and to go to the next question is the things that we do together. We haven't, the way the industry has been built and structured in the past hasn't been very collaborative. It's been competitive. We compete on things that we shouldn't even compete on. But then this new space, as Oliver says, forces us to be in a place where we have to collaborate. How do you foresee that would happen with the summit in mind? What are sort of the expectations that, and the people who are going to come, and, you know, sort of the industry leaders?
I think that sometimes the scarcity mindset makes us to compete even within the little resources that we do have, right? But in this case, we have a common enemy, which is sustainability. So it forces us to come together, right, and figure it out. What we've tried to do within the festival is to make it less of a talk shop. I mean, we'll do have panels, but have more practical things going on, like town halls, workshops, you know, and hopefully crack some of these things together, or even make it a beginning or spot for some potential solutions that will come down the road. I know that most solutions do not come out of festivals, they come post-festivals. So we hope that will be at the beginning of not only discussions, but also the beginning of some collaborative problem solving. So if you talk about reach, you know, how do we hack reach in this very digital economy? If you talk about how do we balance between sustainability and content quality, those are kind of things that we need to discuss, but not only discuss, but start putting pen to paper and drafting some things that can be used with our ecosystem.
For you, Molly?
I'm really excited to come to African Media Festival. I think this is such a strong initiative, but ultimately I think that, to echo what Maurice said, we do have a common looming threat, right? And I don't necessarily consider myself part of the threat, as more so part of the solution, right? So AfroPods is a podcast hosting platform. And I think when you look at like all of the people that are going to be entering the space, it allows us the opportunity to have conversations that maybe we wouldn't have before, to come up with creative solutions, because really the fact of the matter is, what it looks like in the West is probably not going to be what's successful in Africa. We can follow what we think the model is just because we're in our early infancy stage. However, Africa is such a vibrant, robust, hugely densely populated continent, right? Maybe not densely, maybe more rural than dense, but there's so much life here. And I think that it does such a huge disservice for Africans around the continent to follow the mold that's been set by people who are not them, especially when it comes to storytelling. There's just nothing more fundamental to the DNA of African people, in my opinion, and I feel like it's very much worth protecting. So to see that this African Media Festival exists across multiple verticals of media is such a privilege to be a part of it, because I hope that podcasting is a really viable solution for many of these companies, and I hope that we can be part of the solution as AfroPods.
Okay, yeah, finally, sometimes it's collaborative, and this come to this space. Sometimes you look at content, and maybe comes from a background of, you know, competition scarcity mentality. Sometimes look at content, and because we don't have models and means on how to, you know, give feedback, sometimes you don't want to hate. You just want to be like, I have feedback. You know, I'm disappointed in this thing because of 1, 2, 3 things, and we have no sort of these tools to do this, you know, across the space. And even now that you're expanding it with content creators, they're like, yeah, this is fine, but how do I communicate this, you know, my disappointment with the content, which is not equivalent to hate, all right? Like, this could have been done better, or this is a part that was missed, right? And this is such a big thing, I think, in the next future, because if you're going to collaborate a lot, then we can discuss those things, so that I take your, you know, your comments on board, not as quote unquote hate, but criticism, which is we can build on this. Maybe you could have done this or you could have had that. Oliver.
I think one of the things that we need to do is, as content creators and as audiences, because we are both. That's what people forget, that we are both. There are times that I'll be watching or listening to James Smart. At that time, I'm his audience. There's times he'll come and consume my content. And so for me, we are at a point where, yes, there are those who will hate. But I think criticism is important. We cannot have growth without criticism. And that's, for me, that's why even on social media, I will take whatever people say seriously. The feedback is important for me. If they tell us our story last night in the bulletin was crap, I will have to listen to them. And that's the same way we have to work in this space that we are headed to. Because we cannot run away from the fact that the audiences have opinions. They have their own biases. They are more exposed because they are consuming more because of the internet. And so we have to think about them and think about how do we tackle whatever they are giving us as feedback, and how does that help us grow in terms of what we are creating as content.
There's one thing to add though to that. So like, as you think about companies compared to content creators, they're different. A company will get trolled. But a person, I think a lot of people, especially Generation Z, is more mindful about the bullying sometimes. Yeah. They're more, like, to Maurice's point, they care about climate change. They care about like protesting about job hours and whatnot. And I think that when you're a content creator, the criticism you get is very different than the criticism you might get as a business, because a business doesn't just have one face, right?
It's multiple.
It's multiple faces, but the content that performs the best is Oliver's face, it's Maurice's face, it's your face, James, and there's a difference there. And I don't want us to get lost in this this vortex of, well, criticism is important. Yeah, criticism is important, but sometimes it looks like trolling, and sometimes it looks supportive, and it depends on who you're getting the criticism from. As colleagues, that's a very different communication than someone who's in Nyeri, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually the same point. Like, now it's expanded. As content creators, then someone has done something and they'll be like, yeah, this is good. It feeds off to the public space, but then it missed something, And so how do we start creating that kind of a space where we're listening to each other and building each other and so that it's not translated as, Oliver is always negative, but Oliver is building something, is like, this is fundamentally wrong, or something here is missing, and have that discussion and move on that, it was just feedback.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to create safe spaces for these kind of discussions to be had. Again, if let's say the nation is struggling with one particular issue, it's only natural that you're a business. It's only natural that at some point you want to sit on it and figure it out fast, right? But when you have safe spaces where people can communicate that these are the challenges that I'm facing, and these safe spaces have to be very neutral, neutral and value agnostic. Where we bring people to just discuss some of the challenges that they are facing in a very vulnerable way, but also safe way. I think that's the starting point, but also allowing us to say that if we all work together to broaden the pie, like, how do we create more nations? And then that makes us to have a bigger pie, and it makes us to also not only, always come to the few that are there in the industry to kind of tell their feelings. So you have a broader ecosystem to work with. I think right now the ecosystem is thin, and it's going down very fast. So we need to broaden the ecosystem, build safe spaces for people to have honest conversations, and be vulnerable.
Okay. Finishing off, Oliver, I'll start with you. I always like asking this question. What's your crystal ball? What's going to happen in this business, this industry, a year from now? If we were to have this same panel, 2024 January. Yeah.
I think we are starting the year on a high with the festival. And I think these conversations, as we move into these conversations, we are able to now be able to find our paths towards the next year. And in the next 12 months, for me, I see a lot of change in the industry. We can't run away from things like AI. ChatGPT is something that will going to we have to know that the trends that are happening, what is happening with Twitter, for instance, as for content creators, it's all these social media platforms. TikTok is something else where even right now, marketers are running away from TikTok because of so many things that are happening. Yeah. So I think unless we have these conversations, we'll never know where we'll be.
Yeah. Your crystal ball, Maurice.
I concur with him. The industry is going to face a couple of challenges from a tech perspective, of course, with AI, but also from a financial point. It is said that we are going through a very difficult financial time right now. I think the cabinet secretary for the treasury, right? What he was saying was that we are going to have sort of like a financial crisis this coming year, right? And Kenyans should brace for that. So I'm thinking that will also affect, of course, media, and it's affecting it when we most need it also.
Molly?
It sucks going last. Sorry. I think echoing your point, Maurice, this recession is serious and it's real, and we should be bracing for impact and mindful of how that will affect our industry. Additionally, I think we're going to see exponential growth. We're seeing multiple college campuses taking on podcasting. We're seeing creators here interested in new forms of media. We're seeing TikTok explode here with the creators, even if the advertisers have a little bit of hesitancy. And I think ultimately what we can expect is that we're going to see the pie get bigger. I don't think that we're in a position to take a piece of the pie right now because it is so fragile. And I think that we have a responsibility to be, as we are here now, and among pioneers in this digital landscape. I've said multiple times how grateful I am. I think it's important to do our best to build the communities that matter to us, whether it's about having conversations in places, having festivals, speaking to the youth, and making sure that we are all growing and educating each other and staying on the cutting edge, because if we think we master digital, we're already behind.
All right. Molly Jensen, Afropods, Maurice Otieno, Baraza Media Lab, and Oliver Madenge, Nation Media Group. Thank you very much. My crystal ball is that we will have the Africa Media Festival for sure. Put that into note. This is a special series, media landscape, coming up at the back of the signing ceremony between the Nation Media Group and Baraza Media Lab. Yes, we look forward to more conversations such as this on the growth of the media landscape, opportunities, threats, and thereabout. My name is James Smart. Thank you for watching.